Welcome to Play the Man Podcast, a podcast seeking to build sturdy men in a wobbly world.
Welcome to our second podcast. I'm your host, Zach Fink. Today we're with Pastor Peter Johnson and Pastor Shane Pennington to help drive our points home today. Our topic is what's up in the PCA. That's the Presbyterian Church in America. You guys better make this interesting.
How can it not be?
Right?
Well, truth be told, Shane and I are both newbies, if you will, to the PCA.
Pete's been Presbyterian a lot longer than I have.
Right, but the whole gamut. I've been everything from PCUSA, 14 years, United States Army chaplain, switched to the Associate Reformed Presbyterian, ARP. Just a qualifier, even as PCUSA, I was operating as a NAPARC and, theologically minded chaplain in person. But I've been PCA since 2019, so that makes me a newbie.
Yeah. And I came into the PCA in 2017, and so probably became a ruling elder about the time Pete came in as a teaching elder.
Right.
Roughly a little bit after. So
Shane did the ruling elder, licensed ruling elder, able to preach regularly, and then became teaching elder.
Awesome.
So what was it like for you coming to the PCA?
So I had my biases, I had my thoughts of what the PCA was, and what I literally thought was if you went to a PCA church in Los Angeles or somewhere in Mississippi, you're going to get the same. It's going to be homogenous. Mm-hmm. Now, what I will say, I got that from the ARP. The ARP was, very, very homogenous. You went to a synod meeting, and it was pretty collective, uniform. What I didn't appreciate was sort of and I don't mean this in all negative ways, but different fights within the PCA. It's more dynamic. It's more, you got people pushing in one direction and people pushing in another direction. That's what I saw. That's not what I anticipated. I thought it was identical to the ARP.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think mine was similar coming into the PCA. I came from a Southern Baptist background, been a Southern Baptist my whole life, Southern Baptist missionary, went to Southern Baptist College, Southern Baptist Seminary. And so I thought the PCA would be a lot like the Southern Baptist Convention. In fact, if you look at Mission to North America, the North American Mission Board, you have Mission to the World, you have the International Mission Board, you have Rich Haven, you have Ridgecrest.
Right.
Everything, it's almost like our entities lay out so similarly.
Convention, General Assembly.
Right, yeah. Messengers and, delegates, whatever. And so it's very similar. But I was a little shocked coming into the PCA of how unsteady things were. Of course, I'm coming in right at the time of Revoice. For those who don't know what Revoice is, that was a conference, maybe 2017. It had to be close to when I came into the PCA. Revoicing the conversation around LGBTQ plus issues of whether or not we can use the term gay Christian, those kinds of things. And so I was pretty shocked when I first came in, and maybe like Pete said, I thought it was more homogenous maybe than I had thought, and felt a little bit more maybe left-leaning than I thought when I came in. So that was kind of my first perception coming in. I was able to go to several GAs, and I think probably now my perception's changed a bit. I feel like the PCA was hit with a lot of different issues all at once. We had the Revoice thing, we had critical race theory, we had a whole host of issues that kind of came all at once. There was 2020 and all of those things that came with it. There was Trump and all that he's,
of course, before that was Federal Vision,
Yeah, there's been things like that, but there was just, in a very short span of time, I think the church faced a lot of unique issues, and, churches with ballast kind of righted themselves and came back. I think that's the PCA, and others got blown over, and others were still waiting to see what happened. But that was kind of my experience, I felt like, coming in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I've been a member of the PCA my whole life, and I I know what you're saying about will they be homogenous, and they're not at all, right? Like I've been to so many different types and versions, but I will say your comment about it, kind of them getting hit with a bunch of issues at the same time. I feel like that's very true, and I feel like the PCA has done a good job of delaying some of those conversations.
Yeah.
Not that that's the healthy way, but they also know some of these things just become not as important as time goes on. Like, what was your vaccine? Like, what? Have you asked that in the last 4 years? Like, no, it wasn't important, but these things are persistent underlying issues that are going to crucify people. And so the PCA is going to, every single one of those things you mentioned, they got to continue to draw the lines where they need drawn. And when they're slow on clarity, which is always the case, I think it's intentional. Yeah. It's a tricky balance to go too hard on one way without context, without bringing people. But I think what I've heard in the General Assembly is that not just teaching elders, we've had a lot of ruling elders step up and go to these things and really speak more on the voice of the people.
And that is the heart of the PCA from its foundation, from its founding, is ruling elders of our laymen in the pew, our grassroots connections. Those kinds of things are what make this denomination. I think that has been healthy. I think I don't remember what the percentage of ruling elders that were at the first GA, but it was a large percentage. And we're seeing more participation by ruling elders. And I think it makes us better. It makes us healthier.
Yeah.
It makes me think of the Army. They say non-commissioned officers run the Army. They make the Army. The ruling elders are really, in many ways, a ballast in our denomination. I think, just as Shane said, they're grassroots. Many mature in their faith, obviously, mature in age. They've experienced a lot. They have a lot to say.
Yeah, I also think they have different skin in the game, right? A lot of ruling elders are like, I'm just a dad, and a husband, and I'm serving this church. I'm not growing my pastoralship. I'm not trying to shepherd a whole flock. Like, I'm shepherding with you guys, and I'm caring about my family. And I think that then you have other leaders in the church, and they just have to put different lenses on sometimes in those conversations, because if they say something to a congregant that may become what the whole church hears, right? So the words are just different. They're measured in different ways. And so I think it's hard for the GA guys to move fast because they're leaders and there's all these people waiting, watching for a mistake is actually what it is. Yeah. So
now, I like what you said too about, it's a phrase Pete uses around here often, that slow is smooth and smooth is fast. Oh, yeah. It is, Presbyterianism is slow and it's deliberate, and that can drive people crazy. And in some ways, here being a Southern Baptist and out west, in Oklahoma, you can see how the Methodists and the Baptists and everybody else got out here, planted churches, and blazed the frontier faster than all the Presbyterians. It's like we're just not getting out here and kind of getting set up.
Get their stone
because we're so slow, and then you look at that, and it can be a frustration. But that slowness, that deliberate, the way that we operate, I think, like you said, in wobbly times, can actually be a benefit because you kind of slow down, you assess things. You make good decisions. You don't just become reactionary. Yeah. And so, I would even say, 5 years ago, coming from a Southern Baptist background, it looked like Southern Baptists were trending in the right direction and Presbyterians in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
And it was like, whoa, what's going on? And I feel like now you might be able to say the opposite. It's I feel like the PCA is in a much better place than maybe the SBC is, and we're going to see. Time will tell, but there is something to be said for moving slowly yet deliberately.
Yeah. I think time will tell, but I think where I have been really encouraged and excited, there was an assault, if you will, on both denominations, but and we seem to have little different issues, right? The Baptists were really hitting with the CRT issue. We were like getting bombarded with the revoice issue, but we also got that as well. But then what I saw is that when we got together in General Assembly, which, you have that many people trying to solve issues. It's slow, it's methodical, it's deliberate. But then I said, hey, you know what? We're weathering the storm. we're actually making some good progress here. It's slow, it's deliberate, but as long as you're doing that course correction and you're slowly moving that ship in the right direction, at least that gives you the confidence that all may be well.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you think what do you think in terms of the General Assembly? Like, what are the things right now you feel like they're really wrestling with hard, or if you feel like they've wrestled back this revoice thing really well and it's not coming back for a while, or do you think that there's other, like, they're almost always got a couple of things that everyone's like, whoa, what are you gonna say?
Right.
Anything they got on the docket right now?
Let me say this. I'll back up and say, I went to last year's General Assembly. It was the 50th anniversary of the PCA, and in some ways that's a little discouraging to think we're only 50 years down the road and we're kind of battling some of these issues that feel so tumultuous and like our denomination might, take a nosedive or whatever. But, the 50th anniversary was really encouraging, and there was unity, and it just felt really good. I mean, and so I think this year's interesting, this year's GA, because I think coming out of it last year, I was kind of like, have we turned a corner? Have we solved the issues? You know what I mean? And we're back to a place of unity and common mission and purpose, and we're moving forward, Or is it just, it's the 50th year anniversary, let's just call a ceasefire, everybody and we're going to just celebrate the birthday, and then we'll go back to fighting next year or whatever. From what we're seeing so far, I mean, we're in the middle of GA week, so that might tell you when we're recording this, but we're in the middle of GA week, and Pete and I couldn't be there, but it feels a lot more like last year and the 50th anniversary than it did the previous 3 or 4 years, where it was very contentious when we were trying to work through these issues.
The previous GAs, we knew what was going to be on the docket, right? And it was a vested interest that I think both sides had. So we knew that GA was going to be like a battle. But the last one we went to, you and I were together, there were some heated issues regarding revoice and all of that. And one man, old Palmer Robertson, got up, and that was what I called a tipping point in the GA. He seemed to take that lever and just tip it. And everyone, just codified with his statement. And
maybe one of the coolest moments ever. I mean, because we've all read O. Palmer Robertson. We've read Christ in the Covenants. But I didn't even know he was still alive. I don't think a lot of people knew. I mean, because he spent so much time in Africa and things like that. But it was they put their names on the screen, and they stand up, and it's like, hey, O. Palmer Robertson, and he stands up, and it was just like, it was like Gandalf had come back or something, and all the, it was like all the hobbits were like, what? And it was like, all of a sudden, everything was going to be all right.
You knew something happened at that moment. It was a tipping point.
It was.
That's cool. It's cool to see OGs stand up and rally. People. That's neat.
Right.
You should probably articulate real quick what a GA is. What is a General Assembly? What is this hullabaloo that happens every year?
So, our system of polity, we have 3 courts. Session is comprised of teaching elders and ruling elders at the local church. Above that is a regional court, which is presbytery. It's all the ruling elders, teaching elders in that region that make up that court. And General Assembly would be a national meeting of teaching elders, ruling elders that all convene. It's put together in different places around the states. Sometimes it's east, west, central.
Cool. Well, encouraging trends. Anything in terms of maybe things that we want to be lifting up in prayer, things that we want to encourage, trends that you're not so happy to see, things that we want to be. Well, I mean, celebrating 50 years means we're also celebrating Macon, right? Mm-hmm. J. Gresham Macon, and we know what he did 50 years ago.
Right.
And so I think everyone also there's a little bit, I wouldn't say this is like a theme, but in division's not the goal, right? But people are going to stand their ground on these things. It wasn't just a few years ago I thought we were looking at a split.
Yeah.
I mean, based on kind of what you had said in terms of these arguments, some of them I was like, well, if there's a handful of churches that just simply are strong enough that don't want to bend, we're looking at some pain here.
Right. Yeah.
And I already kind of know where I'm landing and most of my peers, but culturally, like we said earlier, the diversity across the PCA, it's pretty deep. And some of those places that come from different places, they feel very differently about revoice or about critical race theory, right? Like culturally, they deal with different things.
Right.
It's an interesting.
And I might say along that, I think it's one of the things that's actually encouraging about the PCA, even though it may look discouraging when you're having some of this, what feels like two competing visions for the PCA, is that I think a lot of what contributes to that is that the PCA is very missional. And so we are committed to taking the gospel to the world. We're committed to church planting. And I think when you do that, you face issues of contextualization. Mm-hmm. You're kind of out in the world and trying to reconcile what it means to be the church in these different contexts. It's easy maybe when you're in Oklahoma, but what happens when you take the gospel to Hawaii
St.
or
Louis.
Portland
or St. Louis
or St. Louis or cities versus rural towns and things like that. And I think when that happens, and Pete and I talked about this a little bit about you can kind of have a castle mentality, and your church can stay in the castle, and you can maybe defend against some of the cultural tide that's coming your way. You can defend yourself from some of these issues, but if you're going to be out and you're going to be moving forward and you're going to be advancing the gospel, you're going to take some hits along the way. You're going to deal with some cultural issues. The boat's going to get blown over. The question is our polity strong enough? Is our commitment to the Westminster Standard strong enough and all that to right us back? You know? And I feel like we're seeing that. But I still want to be a church that's out, on the frontiers. I still want to be a church that's pushing the gospel. I don't want to be the church that becomes the holy huddle, that builds big, high, strong walls, and we all stay behind those walls, and then we don't advance the gospel. And I think that's the tension of the PCA, and but I think it's a healthy tension. So.
Yeah. I like the parish mentality. Like instead of castle, the idea of a visual for our parishes. You have a mini stronghold to recover and heal, to train and educate, to be a part of the locals. But it is not. I mean, if it gets attacked, it's going to take some damage. It's not a castle. So
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Play the Man podcast. Stay sturdy, friends.